Della Hartwell had ridden 11 years for the Diamond V. 11 years reading brands nobody else could read. And at the spring roundup, in front of 19 men and the cook, Colonel Harlan Vance took her tally book and threw it in the fire. He called her a thief. She did not argue. She did not cry. She watched the brass corners of her father's book go black in the coals. The night before, Vance had come to her line shack. He'd made his meaning plain, and she'd told him no. Quiet, flat, now, in daylight, with the whole crew standing there, he said it out loud. "A woman who won't be grateful has no place reading my brands." 19 men heard it. Not one of them spoke. So before the bunkhouse door slammed behind me, I rolled one thing into my slicker. One thing the colonel would have paid the whole basin to burn. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we ride, do this one thing. Tap subscribe, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story rides. Now, let's begin where it began. She came to the Diamond V a half-grown girl with a dead father and a saddle too big for her. Nobody sent for her. She just showed up at the cook shack one October, 12 years old, asking for work. The foreman then was a decent man named Ott. He looked at her hands. Then he looked at her eyes. And he gave her a bunk in the tack room and a string of the worst horses on the place. She never left. That was the ground that took her in. Not the man. Never the man. The ground. The long grass running silver in the wind up toward the Sweetwater breaks. The cottonwoods along the creek that went gold every fall, like somebody had struck a match to them. The cold, clean mornings when the whole basin lay under frost, and her breath hung white, and the cattle came down off the bench in a long, dark line. She loved that. She loved it the way some people love a person, and it was the only thing that had ever loved her back. By the time she was grown, there was not a man in Sweetwater County who could read a brand the way Della Hartwell read a brand. You have to understand what that means. Out here, a brand is a name. A brand is a deed. A brand is the only word between a man and a rope, and brands lie. They get worked over. They get blurred and burned and freshened and stolen. A good brand reader can look at a hide and tell you the truth under the mark. Della could do more than that. She could look at a running calf on the dead run at 50 yards and tell you its mother and its birth month and whether the iron on its hip had been laid once or 12. She read the country like scripture. And she was honest to the bone. That's the part you need most. Because everything that happened because of that. She mended the Barkay's fence for free. Old Widow Kettleman's place, across the creek. Ruth Kettleman had buried her husband under the one cottonwood on her home quarter and was trying to hold 140 head and a boy with nothing but a bad note and her own 2 hands. When Della found Barkay wire down along the section line, she fixed it. Didn't tell anybody. Didn't send a bill. She'd pull her horse up, get out her fencing pliers, and splice the strand tight and go on. Because a down fence meant lost cattle, and lost cattle meant a widow one step nearer to ruin, and Della Hartwell could not ride past that. It wasn't in her. And she taught the tally. There was a boy on the Diamond V crew that spring, Wiley Pratt, 19 years old and green as June grass, all elbows and eagerness. Nobody else had time for him. Della did. She'd sit him down of an evening with a stub of pencil and show him how to keep a count that couldn't be argued with, how to mark a cow so a mark meant something. A tally's just the truth written down, she told him. You keep it honest, it'll stand up for you when your own word won't. Wiley soaked it up like dry ground soaks rain. He'd have walked into the creek for her. That was Della, before. Decent, careful. Sure that a clean record and a good day's work were a kind of armor. Sure that if she did right, right would cover her. That was the mistake. But she didn't know it yet. Now hold that picture of her, because I'm going to show you the thing that started all of it. And I want you to watch how small it was. It was a line camp up under the rimrock, late in the fall works. Cold enough that the water buckets skinned over at night. Della rode in at dusk to change horses, and there was Emmett Doss at the fire. Doss was Vance's range foreman. A big, quiet man with a way of standing too still. He ran the far country, the rough breaks where the colonel's cattle mixed with everybody's cattle, and he answered to nobody but Vance. Della had never trusted him and had never been able to say exactly why. He was good with stock. He was good with men. But there was a stillness to him, like a snake in the sun, and her horses never liked him. He had a straight iron heating in the coals. Not a stamp iron, not the Diamond V brand on its handle, the clean quick mark you slap on a calf and pull. A straight iron. A running iron. A single bar of steel with the working end shaped to draw. You don't stamp with a running iron. You paint with it. You freehand. And a man who can freehand a brand can take one man's mark and turn it into another man's mark, curve by curve, line by line, with the calf bawling under his knee. Della looked at that iron. She looked at Doss. "Gate hinge is sprung on the horse trap," Doss said. He didn't look up, heating it to true the pin. "Sure," Della said. And she let it go. That's the thing, she let it go. A running iron in a foreman's hand, out in the far breaks, with a reason ready before she'd even asked. She told herself men fix hinges. She told herself Doss had cattle sense enough to be trusted. She rode on to her fresh horse and rode out and did not write it down. But it stuck a little burr in her mind. And that winter, the burr started to itch. Because the count was wrong. The Diamond V's calf crop that year came up impossible. Too high. You work cattle long enough, you get a feel for what a herd can throw. So many cows bred, so many calves live, weather takes some. The wolves take some, and the number lands where the number lands. Year after year it lands close. Della had 30 years of her father's tallies and 11 of her own, and she knew the shape of an honest crop the way she knew her own hands. The Diamond V was throwing calves it had no cows to make, and across the creek, the Barkay's count came up short. Ruth Kettleman's little herd, that should have thrown 40-some calves that spring, showed barely 20 on the ground. Winter kill, folks said. Bad luck, folks said. A widow can't watch her cattle close, folks said. Della didn't say anything. She wrote it down. She wrote it in her father's book. The brass-cornered tally book he'd carried 30 years, the one thing of his she had left, worn soft as cloth at the spine and smelling of the leather it had ridden in. She wrote the Diamond V's fat, impossible numbers on one page, and the Barkay's thin, bleeding numbers on the facing page, and she looked at the two of them across the fold, and she felt something cold go down her back. Because she knew what a running iron did. Here's the thing about a worked brand, and remember it, because the whole story turns on it. A running iron writes clean on the hair. A man who knows his business can take a Barkay and draw it into a Diamond V so slick that on a living, breathing, walking calf you would never see the seam. The hair grows over. The mark heals smooth. On the hoof, it's a lie you can't catch. But the hide remembers. Underneath the hair, in the flesh, the old scar and the new scar don't lie down together. Burn a brand once, it scars one way. Burn over it, and the two burns cross. Skin that calf, turn the hide flesh side up, and the truth is right there in the meat, plain as a signature. The hair forgives. The hide never does. Della knew that the way she knew the sun came up. Her father had taught it to her before she could ride, and now she sat in a cold line shack with 2 pages of numbers that didn't add, and a picture in her head of Emmett Doss with a running iron in the coals, and she started, slowly, to understand what she was living in the middle of. She could have run. She could have kept her head down. She was a hired hand with no kin and no claim, and the man throwing the false calves was the biggest man in the basin. She did the honest thing instead. Of course she did. That was Della. She wrote it up. Careful and plain, no accusation, just the numbers and the question. The Diamond V's crop is running high against its cows, she wrote. The Bar-Kays is running short. Someone ought to look at that before the fall inspection, for the outfit's own protection. She wrote it to Vance's bookkeeper, a mild little man named Prentice, who kept the ranch's accounts at the home place. Because you took a concern like that up the proper way, through the books, on paper, where it left a mark. She signed it. She dated it. She handed it over. Remember that piece of paper. It's the first warning. It's written down. It matters more than she could have known. Prentice read it, and his mouth went tight, and he said he'd see the colonel got it. Nothing happened. A week went by, too. The paper went into a drawer or a stove, she never knew which, and no man came to look at the count, and the Diamond V calves kept getting fat on grass that had fed another woman's cattle. That was the first time it should have worked. A clean record. An honest note. Filed the right way. Her armor. She waited for it to protect her. It didn't protect her at all. What came instead came at night. She was at the near-line shack, the one down on the creek, alone. She'd banked the fire and pulled her boots and was sitting on the bunk edge in her sock feet, cleaning the day's mud off her spurs when she heard a horse. One horse, walking, then boots on the step. Then the door opened without a knock, and Colonel Harlan Vance stood filling it with the cold pouring in around him. He'd been drinking a little. Not drunk, just enough to loosen the collar on the thing he'd come to say. He was a big man still. At 50-some, silver at the temples, handsome the way a bank is handsome. He owned 400,000 acres of grass and a town's worth of paper and the note on half his neighbors. He had built the Diamond V out of nothing but nerve and other men's misfortune, and he had never in his life wanted a thing he could not, one way or another, get. He wanted Della Hartwell in his house. He didn't say it ugly. Not at first. He talked about how long she'd been on the place, how she was wasted in a line shack, how a woman with her sense and her looks ought to be up at the home ranch, warm, done with the horses and the cold and the men's rough talk, how he'd been watching her a long time, how a word from her could change her whole life. Della stood up. She stood up because she wasn't going to hear it sitting down in her sock feet. "I'm obliged for the work, Colonel," she said. "I'll keep giving you the best day's work in this basin. That's all I've got to give you." He came a step further in. "Don't be a fool, girl," he said, and the warmth was going out of his voice now, running out like water through sand. "There's not a thing on this place you can't have. You just have to stop being so proud about it." "It's not pride," she said, quiet, flat, the way you'd talk to a green horse that's thinking about rearing. "It's no. I'm sorry if you rode down here for a different answer, but it's no. And it'll be no tomorrow. And it'll be no next year. I read your brands, Colonel. That's the trade between us. That's the whole trade." For a long moment the room was so still she could hear the creak. Then something changed in his face. It didn't get hot. That's what she'd remember. It didn't flush up angry. It went cold, and it went smooth, like ice forming, like a door closing on the inside of a man. He had asked and been told no, and a man like Harlan Vance did not have a shelf in him to put a no on, so he put it somewhere else. He put it away to use. "You'll wish you'd been grateful," he said, and he turned and went out and pulled the door shut soft behind him, which was worse than if he'd slammed it. She heard his horse walk off in the dark. She stood there in her sock feet with a spur in her hand for a long time. She didn't sleep much. But she wasn't afraid. Exactly. She'd told the truth. She had a clean record and 11 honest years, and a note on file, filed the right way. In the morning she'd go back to work. She still thought the truth would hold her up. Morning was the spring roundup, and the roundup is where he broke her, in front of everyone, on purpose, in the light. Picture it, because this is the scene the whole thing was built to reach. Cottonwood Flats, first real warm day of the year. The gather held loose in the bottom, 400 head balling and milling and raising a fine gold dust that hung in the low sun. The remuda off to the side, the branding fire going, irons in the coals, the smell of scorched hair and green grass and coffee. 19 men working, riders, ropers, wrestlers, the ironman, the tally-keeper, and the cook up from the wagon with his sleeves rolled, come to watch because word had traveled the way word does. They were all there when Vance rode in. He didn't ride in like a man come to work, he rode in like a man come to hold court, straight-backed on his big blood bay. Doss a length behind him, and a little to the side, the way a gun rides a little behind and to the side. He pulled up at the fire, and the work slacked, and the men straightened, and Della, who had been reading Brands at the chute all morning with her father's book open on her knee, felt the day tip. "Hartwell," Vance said. Loud, so it carried. "Bring that book here." She rode over and got down. She held the book out to him. He didn't take it. "Boys," he said, turning his horse a little so he had them all in his eye, "I've got a hard thing to say, and I'll say it plain, because you've a right to know who you've been working alongside." He let it sit. He was good at this. "We're short. Every year we're short, and every year I've eat the loss and said nothing. Calves that ought to be wearing my iron, gone. I finally put a man to watching." A glance at Doss. Doss's face was stone. "And it's her." For a second, nobody breathed. Then a kind of low sound went through the men, the sound a crew makes when the ground moves under them. "That's a lie," Della said. Not loud. She didn't have to be loud. "And you know it's a lie, Colonel, because the shortage is yours, and I sent Prentice a note on it 3 weeks ago, in writing, asking somebody to look at the count." "Look at the count. That's all." "Look at it, and it tells you everything." She'd handed him the club. She saw at the instant it left her mouth. "Because," he smiled. "The count." He held out his hand now, and she'd already given him the book. It was in his hand, her father's book with its worn brass corners and its 2 facing pages of numbers that told the truth. "You mean this, Count? This little book you keep off by yourself where no honest man can check it. This is where you've been writing down what you took." He weighed it in his hand. "You want us to look at the count, girl?" And he flipped it, spinning, into the branding fire. She moved. She got 1 step. And Doss was off his horse and in front of her, big and quiet and immovable, one hand flat on her chest, not shoving, just there, a wall, while behind him her father's book, 30 years of his hand, 11 of hers, the last thing she had of him. The brass corners she'd rubbed shiny with her thumb 10,000 times, caught and curled and went up in the branding coals. The pages opened like a hand. The numbers burned. She smelled it. She'd smell it the rest of her life. "Emmett," Vance said. "Easy, you've watched her. Say what you've seen." And Doss said it, looking right at her, in front of God and the crew, in that flat, dead voice. "I've seen her cut Diamond V calves out to the breaks and work my iron over. Seen it more than once. I'll swear it anywhere you like. 19 men. The cook. Wiley Pratt somewhere back in the crowd with his face gone white. The whole basin's working world standing in the gold dust, and every one of them heard Emmett Doss swear a thing that was the exact photograph of Doss's own crime. Turned around and pinned on her. Della looked from Doss to Vance. And it was in that moment, watching the Colonel's calm, smooth, handsome face, that she finally understood the shape of the thing. He wasn't punishing her for stealing. She hadn't stolen. He was punishing her for the no. He'd built this, the note ignored, the watching man, the swearing, the fire, all of it, overnight, out of a woman telling him no in a line shack. And he'd done it so clean that not one man there could see under the hair to the scar. "A woman who won't be grateful," Vance said, and he said it slow, so it would be remembered, so it would be the last word on her, "has no place reading my brands." There it was. Out loud, in daylight, in front of the whole crew, the true reason wearing the false one like a coat. She could have screamed the truth. She could have wept, begged, named him for what he was. It would have looked exactly like a caught thief crying caught. She saw that too. She saw that any noise she made would only paint the picture he'd drawn. So she didn't make any. You'll want to know, Vance went on, because a man like that always tightens the screw one more turn. Your wages are held against the loss. Every dollar. You'll not take a cent of Diamond V money out of this basin. Take your horse and your saddle. The horse is yours. I'll give you that much. And be gone off my grass by dark. If a man sees you on Diamond V ground after sundown, he's within his rights. Della looked at the fire one more time. There was nothing left of the book but a black curl, already falling to ash. She looked at the 19 faces, the men she'd worked beside, roped beside, wintered beside, and she watched them not meet her eyes. Every one of them. Looking at their boots, at the cattle, at the sky, not one word. Then she got on her horse. She rode to the bunkhouse for her outfit. They let her. Vance nodded her the 10 minutes, and she rolled her bedroll and her war bag with hands that did not shake, because she would not give them shaking hands to remember. And when the door was shut behind her and she was alone in that dark bunkhouse for 1/2 a minute, she went to the far corner, under the loose floor plank by the wall, and she took out the thing she'd hidden there 4 days before. The thing she'd cut and salted and kept without quite letting herself know why. A calf hide. Fresh, Diamond V branded, clean and new on the hair, off a calf she'd found dead of scours in the breaks the week before and skinned out on a hunch she couldn't name. She rolled it tight, flesh to hair, and she pushed it down inside her slicker and rolled the slicker and tied it behind her cantle, where a slicker rides on every saddle in the West and draws not one eye. And she rode off the Diamond V with her wages stolen and her name in the dirt and her father's book gone to ash, carrying rolled behind her the one thing Harlan Vance would have paid the whole basin to burn, and not knowing yet, not fully, what she had. She rode south for Cottonwood Bend. She didn't look back at the flats. She looked at the country. The long grass. The cottonwoods, the breaks running blue up under the rim. The only thing that had ever loved her, and she was riding off it in disgrace, and the man who'd done it to her would be eating his supper tonight in a warm house believing it finished. It wasn't finished. But she didn't know that yet either. Right then she was just a woman on a horse with nothing, and it took everything she had not to break. And she didn't break, and by the time the lights of the town showed up ahead in the dusk, she was empty and dry-eyed and worn down to the wire. Cottonwood Bend was a 2-street town on the stage road, a bank, a mercantile, a livery, a stock association hall, and a rooming house run by a hard-handed woman named Sull, who took Della's last $4 for a week's board, without asking a single question, which was its own kind of mercy. The room was narrow and clean. One window, one bed, one chair, a washstand. Della set her saddle in the corner and her war bag on the chair, and she stood a while looking at the slicker roll where she'd leaned it by the door. Then she untied it. She spread the slicker on the bed. She took out the hide and unrolled it, hair side up first, and there it was, the Diamond V, clean and healed and honest-looking as any brand in the territory. On the hair, no man alive could have called it anything but what it said it was. She turned it over. Flesh side up, in the yellow lamplight, she leaned close and she read it the way her father had taught her before she could ride. And under the smooth new Diamond V, plain in the meat, crossed and doubled, and impossible to unsee once you'd seen it, was the old scar. The first burn. The mark this calf had worn before somebody free-handed a running iron across it in the far breaks. A Bar K. Ruth Kettleman's iron. The widow's brand, burned first, healed, and then written over into the kernels. The hair had forgiven it. The hide had not. And here in her two hands, salted and cured and real, was the whole crime laid out like a page of print. The theft, the method, the man, all of it. The exact thing Vance had accused her of, that she had never done, that he did and could not stop doing, and could not imagine ever being read. Della sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long, long time. Something moved in her then, and it wasn't what you'd think. It would have been easy to feel the hot thing, the wild thing. Burn his house, shoot his horse, put a match to his stacks and ride laughing. She could feel that thing pulling at her, low and red. Every wrong he'd done her was in her mouth like copper. But she looked at the hide, and she looked at the scar under the mark, and what she thought was, he taught me to read. All those brands, all those years, he paid me to read the truth off a hide, and he was so sure of himself he never once thought the trade cut both ways. She thought, I don't have to burn him. Burning is what he'd understand. Burning is what he'd expect. He's stronger than me at everything a fire is good for. But nobody in this basin is stronger than me at reading a brand. She wasn't going to take her revenge. She was going to take him to the truth and make him stand in it. She'd trade his ruin for something better than revenge. She'd hand it, calm, to the law, and let the law do to him in daylight the exact thing he'd done to her in daylight, read him out, in front of the same eyes, off the record. Justice, not a fire. A page. And to do that she needed more than a hide. A hide alone, a turned-off hand could have faked, they'd say. She needed the count. She needed a paper in his own house. She needed a living man to say what he saw. She needed to build a thing so solid that when she laid it on a table, not one honest man in the basin could look away. She rolled the hide back up, careful, and put it under the loose board she found beneath the washstand, because she'd learned about loose boards. And she blew out the lamp, and for the first night since the shack, she slept. In the morning she rode for the Bar K. Ruth Kettleman met her at the door with a scattergun, because a widow alone learns to meet everything at the door with a scattergun. Then she saw who it was and set it against the jam. Word of the roundup had beat Della to the county, the thief girl run off the Diamond V, and Ruth Kettleman looked at her a long moment on that porch, taking her measure. They say you're a cattle thief, Ruth said. They do, Della said. I've had you fix my fence 3 summers running and never send a bill, Ruth said. A thief doesn't fix a widow's fence for free. Get down. There's coffee. So Della got down. And at Ruth Kettleman's plank table, with the boy Sam listening big-eyed from the corner, and the one cottonwood showing gray budded through the window over the grave, Della laid it out. Not the hide. Not yet. The hide she kept close. But the count, she laid out the count. Your calf crop's been coming up short, she said. 2 years running. Everybody tells you winterkill. It isn't winterkill. Your calves are wearing the Diamond V brand and grazing the Colonel's grass right now, and I can show that they came off your cows. Ruth Kettleman went very still, and then she got up and went to a tin box on the shelf and took out a paper and put it on the table in front of Della, and her hand was shaking now, the way Della's hadn't let itself shake at the fire. It was a note. A promissory note, held by the Stockmen's Trust of Cottonwood Bend, Mordecai Kell, president, $1,200, against the Bar K, against everything, the land, the house, the grave under the cottonwood, all 140 head. Due in 30 days. I can't make it, Ruth said. Flat, she'd gone past crying about it a while back. I'm 40 calves short 2 years running, and the market's what it is, and I can't make the note, and Kell knows I can't. And you want to know the joke? She laughed, and there was no laugh in it. Vance sent his man around, offered me $400. For the cattle and the grass rights, both, $400. He'll buy my whole life for $400 the week before the bank takes it for nothing, and either way he gets the grass, and either way I'm off the ground my husband's buried in. Della looked at the note. $1,200. 30 days. $400. And in her mind she laid it against the hide under the washstand board, and against the Diamond V's fat, impossible count, and against Emmett Doss with a running iron in the coals, and the whole ugly machine of it turned over in front of her, and she saw it entire. He hadn't stolen the widow's calves out of simple greed. He'd stolen them to make her short. Made her short to make her fail. Made her fail to squeeze the note, so Kell could foreclose, so the grass would fall to the Colonel cheap. So cheap he'd offer $400 for 140 head, and a home place, and call it generous. The stolen calves and the crushed widow and the crooked banker were all one thing. One reach. One machine, running smooth, and it had already chewed up Ruth Kettleman and spit out Della Hartwell, and it was 30 days from swallowing the Bar K hole. 30 days. How long can you hold? Della asked. 30 days, Ruth said. Then it's Kell's. Then we've got 30 days, Della said, and she didn't say what for, not yet, because she was still building the thing in her head, still counting what she had and what she lacked. But something in the way she said we made Ruth Kettleman sit back down. You, Ruth said slowly, have got a look on you like my husband used to get. What are you fixing to do, girl? Della thought about it. Outside the window, the boy Sam had gone out to the poor thin gather in the home pasture, the short crop, the 20 calves where there should have been 60, and he was moving among them the way a boy moves who's trying to be a man before his time. She thought about the 19 faces that wouldn't meet her eye. She thought about her father's book curling in the fire. I'm not going to run, Della said. And I'm not going to raid him, tempting as it is. He'd win that. He wins fires and guns and running. What I'm going to do is read him. Out loud. In front of the whole basin, off the record, the same way he read me. Only what I read is going to be true. She stood up and set her cup down square. I need to go into town, she said. There's a man just come to the territory. New stock inspector. Josiah Crane. They tell me he's honest, and they tell me he's slow and careful and can't be bought. And slow and careful and can't be bought is exactly what I need. I'm going to go file. On paper. Sworn. Ask the territory for a formal brand inspection of the Diamond V herd. She heard herself say it, and knew it for the point of no return, knew that once that paper had her name on it, there was no more keeping her head down, no more quiet ride out of the basin, no unringing it. Once I do that, Ruth, he'll come for me. He'll turn it around like he turned the fire around. He's got a whole basin believing I'm a thief already. He'll make me the criminal for saying it. Then why do it? Ruth said. Della looked at her, and for the first time since the flats, she almost smiled. Because a brand inspection is the one door in this whole country he can't lock, she said. He owns the bank and the crew and the note and 19 men's silence. He doesn't own the hide. He can't buy what's in the meat under the mark. All I have to do is get him and me and that hide in one room with an honest man holding the law, and then I don't have to shout, or beg, or burn a thing. I just turn it over. She went out and got on her horse. Ruth Kettleman stood in the door with the scattergun leaned in the jam behind her and watched her go, and the boy Sam stopped among the too few calves to watch her too. A woman riding off toward town alone, with nothing but a saddle and a slicker roll and a thing in her that had gone quiet and hard and certain. She rode into Cottonwood Bend, and she hunted up the little frame office with the new painted sign, Territorial Stock Inspector, and she got down and tied her horse, and she stood one moment on the walk with her hand on the door. Behind that door was the man who could set it all in motion, and the second she gave him her name and her sworn word, the machine that had chewed up the widow would turn and come for her, full weight, with a whole county already primed to believe the worst, and this time there'd be no quiet ride out. This time she was riding straight into it, on purpose, with a false thief's name on her and the truth rolled up in a slicker. She opened the door and went in. The office was smaller than she'd thought. One desk, two chairs, a stove gone cold, and behind the desk a lean man with ink on his fingers and a pair of spectacles pushed up on his forehead. He didn't stand fast the way town men did for a woman. He looked at her boots first, then her hands, then her face, and she knew he was reading her the way she read cattle. "Josiah Crane," he said. "Stock inspector. You've been standing on my walk a while." "Della Hartwell," she said. "I've ridden brands for the Diamond V 11 years. I'm here to file." "File what?" "A request for a formal brand inspection of the Diamond V herd. Sworn, on paper, with my name at the bottom of it." That moved him. Not much. A little. He pulled the spectacles down and pointed at the chair. She sat, and she told it plain, the way you'd tell a doctor where it hurt. The high calf crop against the cows that couldn't have thrown that many. The Bar K coming up short 2 years running. 40 calves gone off a widow's grass, and no winter kill to blame. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She laid it down like tally marks in a book. Crane listened without a word. When she finished, he was quiet a long moment. "You know what happens when I file this," he said. "You know it turns and comes back on you. I know it better than you do. Vance owns the bank in this town. He owns the note on half the small outfits in the basin. He'll say you're a turned-off hand with a grudge. He'll say I'm a thief," Della said. "He's already saying it. He said it to 19 men and a cook before he burned my father's tally book. That part's done. There's nothing left he can take from my name that he hasn't already taken." Crane studied her. Then he took a clean sheet, and he dipped his pen, and he said, "Tell it to me again. Slow, every figure." She told it slow. He wrote. When it was done, he turned the paper and gave her the pen, and she signed her name where an honest man's law would hold it. Della Hartwell. The ink dried, and something in her chest that had been standing braced for a month let down half an inch, because now it was real, and it was on record, and it couldn't be unsaid. "I'll want to see the herd," Crane said. "That takes time. Riders. A day set with the association." "Take your time," she said. "Just don't tell Vance what I've got." "Only that I've asked." "Why?" "Because if he knows what I'm holding, he'll burn the country to get it. If he only thinks I'm talking, he'll do what proud men do. He'll come at the talk." Crane almost smiled. "It was the first time. You've thought about this." "For a month," she said. "It's about all I've had to think about." She went out onto the walk, and the town was going on the way towns do. Wagons and dust and a dog asleep in a doorway, and none of it knew that the first crack had just been set in Harlan Vance's whole basin. She got a room at Sull's rooming house because Sull asked no questions and charged by the week. And that night, she pried up the loose board beneath the washstand and laid the slicker roll under it, and the salted hide with the lye cured into its flesh went down into the dark under the floor, and she set the board back and put the washstand on it and slept, for the first time in a month, hard. Word travels slow in cattle country, but it travels. It travels bunkhouse to bunkhouse, saddle to saddle, the way a smell of smoke will find you across a mile of sage. And what came back to the Diamond V was not the truth. It was a rumor with the corners knocked off. A turned-off hand was in Cottonwood Bend spreading lies, saying the colonel stole, saying it to the new inspector. Della heard, 4 days after, that Vance had gone to the county and sworn out a warrant, a theft warrant, against her, for the very calves he'd worked with a running iron off a widow's grass. She was standing in the street when the boy told her, Sull's boy, who'd heard it from a freighter. And she felt the old thing rise. The heat, the want to saddle up and ride out to the Diamond V and throw it in the man's teeth. She felt it come up her throat like sickness. And she stood in the street and let it come, and let it break, and let it go by. Because she had promised herself one thing on the flats a month ago, and it was this. She would not burn him. She would read him. A warrant was paper. Paper meant a court. A court meant a room with the law in it, and Vance made to stand in it. He thought he was setting a trap. He was building her a hall. She went on quiet. She acted the part of a woman with nothing but a grievance and a rented room. And that was the hardest work she'd ever done, because every hour she wanted to run to Crane and say it faster, and she made herself wait, and let the machine grind slow toward the day. It near came apart once. She'd ridden out to the Bar K in the gray of a morning to tell Ruth Kettleman how it stood, and she was 2 hours in the yard when a rider came over the rise on a Diamond V horse. She knew him. Charlie Reese, a fair hand, no part of Doss's business, just a man riding fence. And he pulled up and looked at her standing there in the widow's yard, and his face went careful. "Della," he said, "heard you'd left the country." "Heard wrong," she said. Easy, like it was nothing. "Ruth's got a stretch of wire down along the coulee. I mended fence for her husband when he was living. I'm not going to stop for the man being dead." Reese looked at the wire she'd in fact restrung the day before. Good tight work. And he looked at the widow in the door, and whatever he'd been told to watch for, this wasn't it. A turned-off hand fixing a widow's fence for nothing was just Della Hartwell, and everybody in the basin knew that was exactly the kind of fool she was. "Long ride for no wages," he said. "Most of the good ones are." He touched his hat and rode on. And Della stood in the yard and felt her heart come back down out of her ears, and Ruth Kettleman let out a breath behind her and said, "Lo, he'll tell them he saw you. Let him." He saw a woman fixing a fence. That's all he saw. That's all there is to see, until I'm ready for there to be more. But it had been close, and it taught her the cost of the game she was playing, that any morning could bring the man who looked too hard. She had 2 things left to gather, and the second was harder than the first. The first was a boy. Wiley Pratt, 19 years old, who'd ridden green onto the Diamond V 2 summers back, and whom Della had taught to keep a tally, so his figures came out honest at the end of a day. Wiley had a conscience that hadn't been broke to the saddle yet, and Della knew something about Wiley that Wiley didn't know she knew. In the fall, at the Farline camp under the rimrock, Wiley had come on Doss with a straight iron heating in the coals, and Doss had told him some smooth thing, and Wiley had ridden off with it sitting wrong in him ever since. She got word to him through Sam Kettleman, who was near his age, to meet her out past the freight road where nobody rode. And Wiley came, hat in his hands, scared white. "They're saying you stole Della," he said. "They swore a warrant. If they find me talking to you, then let's not waste it," she said. "Wiley, last fall. The line camp under the rimrock. You saw Emmett Doss with an iron in the fire. The boy went still. He said it was for the gate hinges. You've got 2 eyes, and I taught you to use them. Was that iron a gate hinge iron or a running iron?" Wiley looked at the ground a long time. When he brought his face up, it was wet at the corners and older than it had been. "It was a running iron," he said. "I knew it then. I've knowed it since. And I said nothing, 'cause I was scared of the man, and I wanted my wages." His voice cracked. "There's calves I helped brand this spring, Della, wore a fresh Diamond V and cried like they'd lost a mother wearing a different mark. I helped. God help me, I helped, and said nothing." "You were 19 and afraid of a hard man," Della said. "You're still 19. But you don't have to still be afraid. There's a stock inspector in town named Crane. Honest man. Can't be bought, from all I hear. I want you to ride in and tell him what you told me. The iron. The camp. What you saw with your own eyes. And then, Doss kills me. And then Doss stands in a court with the law's hand on his collar and can't touch you or anybody. That's the whole of my plan, Wiley. Get every one of them in a room where the killing's already been took out of their hands." She looked at him steady. "I'm not asking you to be brave in the dark. I'm asking you to say true words in the daylight in front of a lawman. That's all. Can you do that?" It took him a while. Then the boy nodded, and wiped his face with the back of his wrist the way boys do, who are ashamed of crying, and said he could. The second thing was paper, and it near cost her everything. Vance kept a private tally ledger, not the ranch books that Prentice the bookkeeper cooked pretty for the county. The other one, the real count, in the Colonel's own drawer, where the numbers had to be true because a man can't cheat himself. Della had seen it once, years back, an honest hand fetching a figure for her boss, and she'd never forgot it, and she knew that in its pages the calf crop stood written in numbers no honest cow in the basin could have thrown. And she knew whose initials went beside the far tally, the range camp count. E.D. Emmett Doss. The man who'd done the reworking had signed for the reworked stock like a fool proud of his sums. She didn't have to steal the ledger. She needed one page. And she got it the way you get most things in cattle country, through a person and not a plan. There was a girl who did the Diamond V wash and carried the slops, a girl Vance never once looked at, invisible the way the poor are invisible to men who own the grass. Della had shared her fire and her bacon with that girl on more than one cold gather. She got word to her. She asked for one thing. A single page, the range tally, the one with the fall count and the initials, torn clean and carried out in an apron. It came to her 4 days later, folded small and gone soft from being carried against a body, and Della opened it under the lamp at Sull's, and there it was. The count, impossible against any honest cow, and at the bottom, in a cramped hand, the 2 letters. E.D. She had it all now. The hide, flesh side up, the bar K scar under the Diamond V, the ledger page in Vance's own book with Doss's own initials, and a living boy who'd say true words in the daylight. 3 warnings ignored, too, all on record if a court cared to look. Her own written note to Prentice the bookkeeper, put in a drawer and never answered. Ruth Kettleman's complaint to the bank about her missing count, waved off by a clerk, and the fire itself, 19 men who'd watched her tally book burn. The file was thick. It was time to let Vance spring his own trap. He sprang it 4 days before the inspection crane had set. She'd known it might come. She'd hoped it would come exactly like this, and still, when it came, her mouth went dry. She was at the livery seeing to her horse in the last of the afternoon, and 3 riders came in off the county road with the dust still on them, and the middle one was Emmett Doss. He had a paper in his hand and 2 hard cases behind him, and a look on his face like a man come to collect a debt he'd enjoy collecting. Della Hartwell, Doss said, and he said it loud, for the street. Warrant for you. Cattle theft off the Diamond V. You'll come with us. The liveryman backed off into the shadow of the stalls. The street went quiet the way a street does when trouble rides in. Della stood by her horse with her hand still on the cinch and made herself breathe. That paper's got a court on it, Emmett, she said. Or you just come to do it in the barn. It's got a court, and it's got you riding out with us tonight, and that roll on your saddle, and whatever else you've been carrying around this town telling lies with. His eyes went to the slicker roll tied behind her cantle, and she saw the want in them, the thing Vance had truly sent him for. Not her. The proof. One of the hard cases moved for the horse. For the roll. And this was the moment. This was the knife edge of the whole month, because the roll behind her cantle held nothing but a spare shirt and her slicker, and the hide was under a floorboard 3 doors down, and Doss didn't know that, and if he took her tonight and rode her out to the Diamond V, there'd be a fire, and no page, no hide, would ever see a courtroom. She'd built the whole thing on Vance overreaching. Now he'd overreached, and it might yet burn her. Take your hand off my horse, she said. The man didn't. And then, a voice came from the livery door, dry and even and pitched to Carrie. That warrant name a lawman to serve it? Josiah Crane stood in the door with his spectacles down and a shotgun broke over his arm, not raised, just held, the way an honest man holds a tool. and beside him stood the town constable, a heavy-set man named Buell with a badge and a face that said he'd been told the whole of it. Doss turned slow. "This is a county warrant, Crane, none of your inspector's business." "A theft of stock is exactly my business," Crane said, "which is the one thing you and the colonel didn't reckon on when you swore it. You want to move on a stock theft charge in this basin. You'll do it in front of the association and the circuit magistrate, on the record, with me sitting. Not in a barn at dark. Not on the road. In the hall. 3 days, same as the inspection I already set. You'll bring your charge and she'll answer it, and every man with a claim in this will stand up and say his piece where it's wrote down." "She'll run," Doss said. "Will you run?" Crane asked her. "No," Della said. "I've been trying to get into that hall for a month. He just carried me the last mile." Doss looked from her to Crane to the constable's badge, and something crossed his face, the first shadow of a man who feels the ground he stood on start to tip. He folded the warrant. He got his men back on their horses. And he said, riding out, "You're a fool, Crane. You'll see whose word holds in that hall." But there was less in it than he wanted there to be. When they'd gone, Della found she'd been holding the cinch so hard her hand had cramped. Crane closed the shotgun and looked at her. "That was close run," he said. "It was meant to be," she said. "He had to come at me for it to end in a hall. I just didn't figure on liking it so little while it happened." 3 days, Crane said. "Bring what you've got. All of it." 3 days later, the Cottonwood Bend Stock Association Hall was packed to the walls. They'd come from all over the basin, because word of a hearing runs faster than word of a wedding. The same men who'd stood in a circle at the spring roundup and watched Harlan Vance burn her tally book and call her thief. They were here, on the benches, hats in their hands. The cook was here. Charlie Reese was here. Ruth Kettleman sat near the front in her black with her boy Sam beside her, straight-backed, her hands folded on a worn reticule. Mordecai Kell sat in the front row in a good coat, the banker, the note holder, sure of his place. And up at the long table sat Josiah Crane and, beside him, the circuit magistrate, a gray old man named Fetterman who'd hung men and freed men and looked like he'd lost the taste for both, but would do his duty. Vance came in last, the way a man comes in who owns the room. Colonel Harlan Vance, 50-some, silver at the temples, a coat cut in Cheyenne, and Emmett Doss at his shoulder like a dog that knew its master. He didn't look at Della. He'd swore a warrant on her. In his mind, she was already dealt with, a turned-off hand answering for theft before her betters, and he'd come to watch the law do the last of what he'd started at the fire. Fetterman rapped the table. "This is a hearing of the Stock Association joined with a territorial brand inspection and a warrant sworn by Colonel Harlan Vance against Della Hartwell for theft of cattle. We'll hear the charge first." Vance stood. He didn't shout. He'd never had to shout in his life. He told it smooth. A hand he'd trusted 11 years, gone soft or gone bad, caught short in her counts, turned off for cause, now spreading lies out of spite and thieving on the side. He was sorry to say it. He'd raised her near, he said, from a half-grown orphan, and it grieved him. 19 of his men could speak to her theft. His foreman had sworn to it. "And where's her proof of these wild charges against me?" Vance said, and now he turned, finally, and looked at Della, and there was a small, cruel confidence in it. "She's told half the county I stole. Let her stand up in front of the association and show one hide, one brand, one figure. Let her produce it, or let her be bound over for the thief she is." He'd asked for it. He'd stood in the one room in the whole country he couldn't lock, and he'd demanded she produce the one thing he'd have paid the basin to burn. Della stood up. She had the slicker roll under her arm. She walked to the long table in front of the magistrate, and the hall was so quiet you could hear the stove tick. She unrolled the slicker, and she took out the hide, salted and cured stiff, and she laid it on the table hair side up first, so they could all see it, a clean diamond V burned plain on the hair of a calf. That's a Diamond V calf, she said. Anyone here read it different? Nobody did. It was Vance's mark, plain as day. You taught me to read a brand, Colonel, Della said. She wasn't shouting. She'd promised herself a month ago she wouldn't shout. And she didn't. 11 years you paid me to read them better than any man in this county, and the first thing you ever taught me was this. A running iron writes clean on the hair and lies on the hide. Freehand a brand over another, and it'll fool the eye on top. But the meat under the mark don't lie. The old scars cut deeper, and it heals different, and it shows through from the flesh side plain as a signature. She put her hand flat on the hide. Turn it over, she said, and read your own. And she turned it. Flesh side up, in the lamplight, before the magistrate and the association, and the 19 men and the widow and the banker and Harlan Vance himself, the truth showed through. Under the clean diamond fee that lay on the hair, the flesh carried the older, deeper scar. A Bar K. Ruth Kettleman's brand, worked over into Vance's, the join of it visible to anyone with eyes, the two marks laid one atop the other in the meat where no iron could smooth them. The hall made a sound. Not a shout. A kind of long, low breath let out all at once. 50 men understanding the same thing in the same second. Ruth Kettleman put her hand to her mouth, and Harlan Vance's smooth face, for the first time in the memory of anyone in that room, went slack. That's one hide, Crane said, into the quiet, and he was on his feet now with a folded page in his hand. The lady said she could show a figure too. He laid the ledger page on the table beside the hide. This came out of the Colonel's own private tally book, not the ranch books Mr. Prentice keeps for the county. The other one. His range count in his own hand. Crane put his finger on the bottom of the page. This is the fall tally off the far camps. It stands at a calf crop no honest cow herd in this basin could throw, and I've inspected this basin's cows, and I'll swear to that from the stand. And here at the bottom, beside the range count, are a man's initials. E.D. Every eye in the hall went to Emmett Doss. That's my range foreman's hand, Crane said. Emmett Doss. Signed for the count he built with a running iron. He looked up. And I've got a witness who saw that iron in the coals. Wiley Pratt. Stand up, son. The boy stood in the back, white as the whitewash, his hat crushed in his two hands, and his voice shook, but the words came out true. The line camp under the rimrock. The fall. Doss, with a straight iron heating in the fire. What he'd said. What Wiley had known it for. And the calves this spring that wore a fresh Diamond V and cried for a Bar K cow. I helped brand 'em, Wiley said, and his voice broke and he made himself go on. I knowed, and I said nothing, 'cause I was scared of that man. I ain't scared enough to keep lying. That's the truth, and I'll swear it on anything you put in front of me. Doss came up out of his seat. That boy's simple. He's her. Sit down, Mr. Doss. The magistrate said, and there was iron in it, and Doss did not sit, and he looked at the door. The Constable Buell was already standing in front of the door. Emmett Doss looked at the door, and at Buell, and at the hide with his work turned flesh side up, and at the page with his own 2 letters on it, and at the boy who'd finally spoken. And whatever a man's face does when the ground goes all the way out from under him, his did it. He set his hand on the back of the bench in front of him to hold himself up. You'll bind over Emmett Doss, the magistrate said to Buell, on rustling and on swearing a false oath to this association. He looked at Doss over his spectacles. You signed for it, man, in your own hand. In a book you thought no living soul would ever open. Doss opened his mouth and shut it. And the one thing he found to say, dry and small, as Buell took his arm, was, he told me nobody reads the far count. Nobody. And that was the whole of Emmett Doss's defense, and it was true, and it hung him. The magistrate let it sit a moment. Then he turned a paper in front of him, and his voice changed, and he looked at the front row. Mordecai Kell. The banker stood, careful, still trying for his dignity. "Your Honor, I'm a note holder. Whatever the colonel and his foreman did in the hills is no. You hold a note on the Bar K," Fetterman said. $1,200. Due in 30 days. Against a widow's land and cattle. He read it off the paper. And Colonel Vance carries a standing offer of $400 for that same place, cattle and grass. $400, for what a $1,200 note stands against. He set the paper down and looked at Kell over it. "You moved that note hard on a widow whose count came up 40 calves short. 2 years running. Did you never ask, Mr. Kell, why a woman working her land honest couldn't make her figures? Or did you know exactly where those calves had gone, because they'd gone to the same man whose bank you carry water for?" Kell said. "The note is legal paper. I'm within my—" "Your charter's a territorial charter," the magistrate said. "It'll be examined. A bank that forecloses a widow it knows to have been robbed, to hand her grass cheap to the man who robbed her, is a bank that has business before this territory it won't enjoy." He waited. "Have you anything to say to Mrs. Kettleman?" And Mordecai Kell, banker of the Stockmen's Trust of Cottonwood Bend, could not meet the widow's eyes. He looked at the floor of the hall, and the one dry thing he said was, "The note will keep," which fooled no one, and he sat down, and no man near him moved to sit closer. Then it was quiet again, and the magistrate turned, last, to the man who'd owned the room when he walked in, Colonel Harlan Vance. Vance stood. Some of the smooth had come back into him, the animal habit of a man who'd never once lost, but his color was bad, and his hand was not quite steady on the bench. "This is a hide," he said, "and a torn page, and a scared boy. Against 30 years of my word in this basin. I built this country. There wasn't a fence or a well or a road in the Sweetwater when I came, and I made it. Every man on these benches has grazed my leavings, or borrowed my money, or eaten my beef in a hard winter. You'll take a turned-off hand's grudge over the man who built the basin?" "The hide's not a grudge," Crane said quietly. "The hide's a fact. I can read it. The magistrate can read it. Any man here can walk up and read it. That's the trouble with the truth in the meat, Colonel. It don't care whose word's been good for 30 years. Fetterman folded his hands. "Colonel Vance," he said, "your warrant against this woman for theft is struck. The theft was yours. The record before me shows a scheme worked in 3 parts, and it's plain enough a child could follow it. You stole the widow's calves with a running iron. You shorted her count so her note came due. You put your bank behind that note to squeeze her. And you offered $400 for a place worth 3 times that, meaning to graze another man's ground on the cheap. And when the one person in your outfit honest enough to read your brands wrote up her concern, he lifted a paper. And Della knew it. The note she'd given Prentice, produced from somewhere, Crane's doing, in writing, to your own bookkeeper, weeks before any of this, you buried it. And then you turned her out and burned her book and called her the thief. She warned you. In writing. You had your chance to answer honest, and you chose the fire." The magistrate set the paper down. "You'll return 140 head to the Bar K, or their value, by count the inspector sets. Ruth Kettleman's note is void as fruit of your fraud, and this territory will say so to your bank. You're bound over for trial on rustling, on fraud, and on the false oath you swore to take this woman's freedom. Emmett Doss goes with you." He looked at Della. "As for Della Hartwell, her name is cleared before this association and every man in it. Her wages, withheld by the Diamond V, are ordered paid in full, with the season's carry. Let the record show she brought no gun and no torch to this. She brought a hide, and a page, and the truth. And she asked the law to read them. That's all she ever asked." The hall was silent, and Harlan Vance looked at Della Hartwell across that long table, over the hide with his own crime turned flesh side up between them, and he had one thing left. The only thing men like him keep to the last. "I built this basin," he said. And Della didn't gloat. She'd promised herself that too, a month back on the flats, and it was the easiest promise she kept all day. She didn't smile. She didn't spit a word back to even the account. She just looked at him. Quiet. The way you look at a played-out horse you once thought was worth something, and she said nothing at all. And her silence was worse than anything she could have said, because it told him and it told the room that he wasn't even worth answering anymore. The 19 men who'd watched him burn her book, watched Buell take his elbow, and Colonel Harlan Vance walked out of the hall a smaller man than any who'd ever grazed his leavings. It was 6 months to the morning when the last of it settled, and the settling was quiet, the way the best things are. The light came up gold over the Bar K, honey-colored on the grass, and the herd stood in it heavy and healthy, 140 head come home wearing their own Bar K again. The diamond fee worked off them proper this time, by an honest inspection, and their true mark burned clean. Ruth Kettleman stood on her porch in the morning with a cup in her 2 hands and no black in her dress anymore, just a plain gray work dress, because a woman who's kept her land has work to do and can't wear mourning at it. The note was paid off out of the recovered stock, $1,200 settled, and the tin box on the kitchen shelf holding a paid receipt now instead of a hanging debt. And Sam Kettleman came up from the home pasture on a good horse, a real cow horse, the kind his father would have set him on. And he sat it easy and tall, no longer a boy watching too few calves, but a young man riding a herd made whole. Della rode in for the morning count. She was the stock inspector's deputy now. Crane had asked her the week after the hearing, said there wasn't a man in the territory could read a brand the way she could, and it was a waste to have that riding fence for wages. She read brands for the whole basin now, the honest ones and the worked ones both, and there wasn't a running iron in the Sweetwater that didn't lie a little easier, knowing Della Hartwell might turn its work flesh side up someday. She wore a plain coat, and in the inside pocket of it she carried a book. Her father's tally book. Brass-cornered, she'd thought it burned to ash in the branding fire, and it near had been, but a hand had pulled it half-charred from the coals that morning and kept it, and it had come back to her after the hearing, its cover scorched black and its pages brown at the edges, but its figures still readable in her father's hand. She carried it every day. Not to use, to have. They said Emmett Doss was on the territorial roads now, in stripes, breaking rock, and would be for a long stretch. They said Mordecai Kell's Stockman's Trust was in the hands of a receiver, the charter pulled, the man himself gone from Cottonwood Bend to wherever failed bankers go. And they said the Diamond V grass, 400,000 acres of the best in the basin, was leased out cheap now to the very small outfits Vance had spent 30 years trying to starve off it, while its owner sat waiting on a trial that would take the rest of what he had. There was one more thing, and Della handled it the way she'd handled all of it. A writer had come out to the Bar K the week before with a folded note, and the note was from Vance's people, his lawyers, his kin, whoever was left to write for a man bound for trial. It asked her, in careful words, whether she might see her way to speaking softer at the trial. Whether, given the years, the near raising, all he'd done for a half-grown orphan, she might find some Christian mercy. It offered, between its lines, to make that mercy worth her while. Della read it standing on Ruth's porch in the morning light. She read it all the way through. Then she set it down on the rail, and she picked up her coffee, and she drank it looking out at the herd. 140 head of the widow's cattle, wearing the widow's brand in the honest sun. And when the coffee was done, she set the cup by the note, and she got on her horse, and she rode out to the morning count without writing a word back. The note stayed on the rail. The wind would take it or it wouldn't. It didn't matter to her either way. Her father had told her a thing once, before the fire ever took his book, before Vance ever took anything. He'd said what's taken by a false brand never stays kept. A worked hide will out. The scar under the mark heals slower than the hair, and it shows through in the end to anyone who knows to turn it over. She'd carried that 11 years reading other men's cattle, and she'd learned it was true of more than cattle. It was true of a widow's land, and a woman's name, and a whole basin held down by one man's word for 30 years. Turn it over. Read the flesh side. The truth's cut deeper than the lie, and it always shows through. She rode into the count with the sun on her, and the herd moving good, and her father's book against her heart. And that's the whole of it, from the fire to the morning. If you've ever been the quiet one who reads the fine print and gets called a fool for it, tell me the town you're watching from, and let's see how far this story rides.